Good evening there, everybody. What is happening? Hopefully, you all are having a wonderful day today. So, I thought that I'll give my little prediction on the Conor McGregor versus Dustin Poirier rematch that is going to be happening, I believe, on January 23rd. So, a lot of sporting events that are going to be coming up within the next couple of weeks. I'm also going to give my Max Holloway versus Calvin Kattar prediction. So, if y'all want to check that out, go ahead and check that out as well. It'll be coming out soon. But anyway, so this is going to be the big fight that is happening, probably in fighting this year, the first big fight that is going to be happening this year, at least in the UFC. Dustin Poirier versus Conor McGregor 2 is a very, very big match, and I'm very glad to finally see Dustin at this point in his career where he is now touted as a very big, I'm not going to say overly big name. I mean, he's a big name to a lot of UFC fans and a lot of people who watch it, or UFC aficionados, kind of like myself, people who watch the sport a lot and know a lot of the names. But, to see him counted as a very great fighter. Because Dustin has transitioned himself into becoming a great fighter. And for those of us that know Dustin Poirier's career, we know that once upon a time, he was a fighter that would lose almost every big fight in his career. Now he's a fighter that's beaten Anthony Pettis, Justin Gaethje, Eddie Alvarez, Max Holloway. Some of these guys were either former champions or interim champions. Pretty much all of them. Whether it be at the 155-pound division or another division, but you know what I mean. When it comes down to the overall, Dustin Poirier has transitioned himself into a very complete fighter in the 155-pound division, which very well might be the most talented division in the whole entire UFC roster, and that's saying a lot, because you also have the divisions out there at 135, 170, the heavyweight division actually is pretty talented, the 185 division is still pretty talented, but out of all the divisions, it's still very possible that the 155-pound division just might be the most talented out of them all. I mean, when you really take a look at the talent, you have Dustin Poirier there, Conor McGregor there, Khabib Nurmagomedov there, Tony Ferguson, Charles Oliveira, Cowboy Cerrone, and Nate Diaz go there from time to time. Max Holloway goes there from time to time. You got almost everyone there when it comes down to the overall. And then you got, new contenders there, kind of like Dan Hooker, who is proven to be a worthy opponent. So when it comes down to it, this is a very talented division. And if I didn't bring up Justin Gaethje as well. So who's going to win in this fight and why? And why do I think they're going to win? I see a certain amount of people predicting Dustin Poirier in this fight. But whenever I see them, say why they're going to pick Dustin Poirier in this fight, it's always because he has more heart than everybody. Or something like that. Well, what you notice in fighting, and not really just in fighting, but in sports in general, a lot of people have emotional predictions instead of logical predictions. Now, if you truly believe that Dustin Poirier is going to win because maybe Conor McGregor is not the same fighter anymore and because he's a better version of himself, I don't necessarily have a problem with that. But I can tell that there's a certain amount of people that want Dustin to win and are predicting him to win, but not actually thinking he's going to win. Because people just don't like Conor. And I get it. But when it comes down to the overall, who do I believe is going to win this fight? I believe it's going to be Conor McGregor. I would be very surprised, to be quite honest with you, if Dustin Poirier made it out of the first two rounds. And a certain amount of the people overall might disagree. When I just take a look at Conor McGregor's left hand, his power, and this is the thing, because a certain amount of people overall think Conor McGregor is just this one-dimensional fighter. I disagree. I think Conor McGregor is a very well-rounded fighter. People try to act like he's this Deontay Wilder. And I'm going to get a lot of the, I'm sure I'm on a lot of the shit list of Deontay Wilder fanboys all across the world. Deontay is a one-dimensional fighter. It is what it is. There are certain power punchers in the history of boxing and the history of the UFC that have been a little bit more one-dimensional. Francis Ngannou is a fighter to where you can take a look at him and say that he's a little bit more one-dimensional, although he has worked on some of his skills. But he would be what you consider a little bit more of a one-dimensional fighter. Tyron Woodley is another one to where I'm not going to call him one-dimensional, but if you play the right style against him, he can be counted as a little bit more one-dimensional. Dan Henderson, even though I wouldn't say that he's completely one-dimensional either, with his striking, he can be a little bit too one-dimensional. All those are great fighters. But Conor McGregor, in my opinion, and a lot of people are going to disagree with this, that's okay. Conor McGregor, in my opinion, is a more well-rounded striker, at least in all of them. So it is what it is. Conor McGregor just has a lot in his arsenal. He uses his reach to his absolute advantage. He has a great left hand. When it comes down to the overall, he establishes distance very, very well. Conor McGregor is not just some one-trick pony. He uses his kicks very well. He uses his strikes very well with his hands. And he does not have as bad as ground game as many people like to think he does. You have a certain amount of these people that say, well, Conor just doesn't have ground game whatsoever. Well, he has a brown belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And for a certain amount of the people that don't know what the rankings are, brown belt is one belt away from a black belt, which is pretty much the highest belt that you could have. Now, of course, there are first degree, second degree, third degree, fourth degree, fifth degree, however many degrees of black belts. But when it comes down to the overall, Conor McGregor is a brown belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. So it's not like he has no idea what he's, doing. Conor McGregor has just had the misfortune, and I've told people this, Conor McGregor has had the misfortune of facing probably some of the best grapplers in MMA history. When you count Chad Mendes, and he has improved his ground game ever since then, you can tell, especially for the Eddie Alvarez fight, but he faced Chad Mendes, who was a A-class wrestler at the 145-pound division, probably the best wrestler at the time there. He had to face Nate Diaz, who was a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt. All right, and is one of the best submission artists in UFC history. I believe he has something like 12 submissions in UFC. So, I think he either has the most or is tied for the most or somewhere around there. Or it could be Damian Maia that has that record. I can't remember. Damian Maia, by the way, the best Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu practitioner I've seen. But when it comes down to the overall, Conor, I have seen him been able to handle himself against decent ground guys. For a certain amount of the people overall that don't remember, he actually out-grappled Max Holloway. And in the first Nate Diaz fight, he actually was able to take Nate Diaz down and sweep him. But he made the mistake of pretty much blowing his whole entire gas tank when it came down to it. And then he tried to take Nate Diaz down. And then, of course, he was not, the same master on the ground that Nate Diaz was. And he made some mistakes. But it is what it is. That being said, Dustin Poirier is a very good ground guy. But for a certain amount of the people that just think Dustin Poirier is going to go out there and grab him and put him to the ground and submit him, I mean, could it happen? You never know. But personally, do I see that happening? No. No, I don't. I see Conor being able to handle himself in all aspects of this fight. I don't believe Dustin Poirier is just going to go out there and submit Conor. Now, to be fair, Dustin Poirier has been pretty decent with some slippery opponents on the ground, such as Anthony Pettis, Eddie Alvarez, certain amount of those fighters. He's able to handle himself on the ground. I believe he has a black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And, he does have not a bad submission game, even though we don't see that many submissions from Dustin Poirier. But I believe this is going to be a mainly stand-up fight. And when you stand up with Conor McGregor, to be quite honest with you, I don't really give, if you're from the division of 145 to 170, I really don't give you that much of a chance with a stand-up game with Conor McGregor. And a certain amount of the people might disagree with that, but I don't see one person, in all honesty, that would be able to take that left-hand shot for the whole entire, that would be able to avoid it for the whole entire fight and take it consistently. Now, Nate Diaz, of course, did, but not everyone is Nate Diaz. All right, so it is what it is. But when it comes down to the overall, I just don't see Dustin Poirier being able to do that. And Dustin Poirier has never had a granite chin. He is able to get hurt even in some of his, recent victories over, say, Justin Gaethje, Max Holloway, and Eddie Alvarez. He's gotten hurt in pretty much all of those fights. So it is what it is. So Dustin is able to get hurt, and I do think he is defensively responsible. I think he's a very good boxer for an MMA fighter, and he's a very well-rounded fighter. But I just don't see him giving Conor McGregor enough problems on the ground. I don't think it's going to go to the ground. I think Conor McGregor most likely is going to knock Dustin Poirier out within 1 or 2 rounds. We'll see what happens. But I personally believe that Conor McGregor is going to win this fight. This is, in my opinion, probably a 70-30 fight. So if Dustin Poirier were to win this fight, I wouldn't be surprised. But if he did win this fight, I would most likely expect it to be by decision. He could stop him a little bit later on. I think if Dustin Poirier does stop Conor, it's going to be within about 4 or 5 rounds. But when it comes down to it, I just don't see Dustin Poirier getting past his left hand. I don't see Dustin Poirier getting past his establishment at distance. Conor, when it comes down to it, if you're a person that does not have not just exceptional abilities, if you don't have overwhelmingly exceptional abilities like an Khabib Nurmagomedov in a certain area, you're just not going to beat him. And that's just the problem. You have to be a fighter that's at least at 170 or a person overall that has to have an exceptional talent over him. And when it comes down to it, Dustin Poirier, even though he is better than Conor in certain areas, like I would say he's more defensively responsible, that reach and his weapons that he has with his offense, I just don't see Dustin Poirier being able to get around that. Now, we'll see what happens, but when it comes down to it, I expect Conor McGregor to knock him out within 2 rounds, and we'll see what happens. That may lead to a rematch with Khabib Nurmagomedov. Maybe Conor McGregor will fight Justin Gaethje or Charles Oliveira, something like that. Or maybe he'll go up to 170. Who knows? But when it comes down to it overall, that's pretty much my prediction for this fight. I believe Conor McGregor is going to win this fight, and, he's probably going to be the favorite, which he should be, in my opinion. So it is what it is. But that's my prediction on here. That's my logical prediction. I'm going with Conor McGregor in this one. If Dustin Poirier wins, hats off to him, and I'll tell you what, he will certainly have me surprised. Because if Dustin is able to get around that left hand and beat Conor, and especially outstrike him and beat him by decision, I would be heavily surprised. I wouldn't be overly surprised if maybe he caught Conor good with something and maybe was able to TKO him against the cage. I mean, I'd be a little bit surprised because Conor does have a very solid chin. But when it comes down to it, I just don't see Dustin Poirier being able to get around his arm reach, his left hand, his power, and his offensive weapons. I just don't see it. But we'll see what happens. Anyways, it'll be a very interesting fight, or at least, between 2 top contenders. So we'll see what happens. But I'm going with Conor McGregor again in this fight. It'll be interesting. Let's see what happens. That's really about it for today. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for watching. I'm going with Conor, and we'll see what happens. Thank you so much for watching. I'll talk to y'all later.